I'll never forget the first time I laid eyes on her. She was in a weight room at Brigham Young University. I was in a weight room. We were the only two athletes in there. And in my mind, I was hoping that she would ask me for a spot. In the weightlifting world, a spot means you help the person lift the weights so it won't fall down on their head or neck and crush them. So I was hoping that she would be lifting a lot of weights so that she would ask me for a spot. A couple moments went by and I heard, "Excuse me, would you give me a spot?" On the outside, I looked calm, but on the inside, my heart was going, yeah, I'll give you a spot. So I walked over and I gave this athlete a spot. And I immediately noticed the definition in her triceps. I was like, ooh, I like this girl. So after the spot, that was it. She went back to working out and I was like, okay, that was it. A couple weeks go by, January 15th, 1990. And all the athletes were playing basketball. I was pretty smooth, so I approached her by approaching one of my teammates to approach her on my behalf, which she talked to me after we played basketball. And this young lady agreed to talk to me after we played basketball. Her name was Vicky, and she was a javelin thrower on the BYU track team. So after the basketball, we talked, and she told me she had a boyfriend. So I was like, okay, cool. Left her alone, and a couple weeks go by, and then I see her in the halls, and I said, excuse me, do you still have that boyfriend? She said, no. And ever since that moment, we've been like peas and carrots. We've been together ever since. We've been married for 21 years now. Now you got to understand this. I'm from the urban area of San Antonio, Texas. Vicky is from Darby, Montana. They don't even have a stoplight in Darby, Montana. But God in His sovereignty knew what I needed and what she needed for His kingdom. And so He brought us together through circumstances to be at BYU at the same time. So my sophomore year, I bring Vicky home to San Antonio, Texas. Now you got to understand, my grandmother is the matriarch. She runs everything. So my grandmother was very, very important to me, and what she said really, really mattered, and what she thought about my decisions really, really mattered. So I brought Vicky home to San Antonio, Texas. And when my grandmother laid eyes on this white girl, it was like, okay, that didn't go over so well. I don't know if you noticed, but I'm black, by the way. And so that didn't go over so well. Now, before you get real rough on my grandmother, I want you to think about this. She was born in Texas during the time of Jim Crow laws. She's seen her father beaten by a white policeman, lynchings, just some things that we read about in history books. She lived and she experienced it. So she filtered Vicky through those experiences. The great thing about Jesus' grace and His limitless life is that He allows us to filter people through His love. Now let's flip the story. I remember the first time I met Vicky's biological mother and her stepdad. They flew their airplane into Provo, Utah. My heart was beating out my chest to meet this man. Now this man, his profession was logging. Like, he was a real mountain man. You know the movie Jeremiah Johnson? You may not know that. Google it. I mean, he's like a real mountain man. So here I am, this 19-year-old kid, and I'm meeting this mountain man. I was trembling. I remember shaking his hand, and I was like, okay, Derwin, do a firm grip. Anyway, as time goes on and our relationship gets more serious, they had an issue with me because I was black and she was white. You see, my father-in-law had experienced some things in his past, and he filtered me through those experiences. But here's the great thing about Jesus and His limitless life, is that He empowers us to filter people through His love. My wife and I have now been married for 21 years. Let me share with you another scene. My grandmother's in hospice and she's getting ready to die. Cancer has ravaged her. It's about 4 o'clock in the morning, and I'd been home for several weeks, and I needed to get back to take care of my family in Charlotte. And I knew that once I walked out of that hospice room, I would not see my grandmother alive again. But she had been incoherent for several days. So in the wee hours of the morning, I grabbed my bags and I was getting ready to take a step. And right as I lifted my leg, my grandmother rose up out of bed, clear as clear could be, and she said, "Dewey," that's my nickname. She goes, "Dewey, you're a wonderful husband and a great man. I love Vicky. You married a great woman." You see, God changed her heart from a racist to a gracist. That's what a limitless life does. My grandmother loved Vicky and she loved her grandkids. She's seen the type of woman that Vicky is. Let me take you to another scene. We are in Oregon at a family reunion for my wife's side. And at this time, my father-in-law was going through a bout of cancer. And I'll never forget, he pulled me into the RV and he sat me down and he said, "Son, I want to apologize to you. You are a great husband and a wonderful man, and I'm honored that my daughter has married you, and I'm honored that you are my son." You see, what happened is in the late 90s, Jesus began to transform my wife and I. And as Jesus began to transform my wife and I, his influence, his limitless life through us began to influence our family, so much so that the lenses of racism were shattered and the new lenses of gracism were realized. And here's the funny thing now, my father-in-law dotes over me. It is funny, when we go to Montana, Vicky's mom and dad, they don't really pay her any attention. They dote over me. Literally, I can't get any rest because they're always introducing me to people. They are so proud of me. You see, gracism is the revealing of a limitless life. Let's take a step back. Who are people, what are cultures that you have filtered lenses through that do not compel you to love them, but compel you to judge them? You see, never read a book by its cover. Open up the pages. We just might learn something. But that's what Jesus came to do. And the Apostle Paul articulates that when he says Jesus is our peace. And he breaks down the dividing walls and he creates one new humanity that's comprised of Jews and Gentiles. That's biblical language for that our ethnic background doesn't matter. What matters is that we're one in Christ, and God takes our diversity and creates this beautiful salad bowl of unity. So check this out. God will give you and I the filters of love to view people through. This is Derwin Gray. Marinate on that.